So, a very warm welcome today for this webinar today. Now I hear what you say. And again, it's one of my absolute favorite topics. I've been teaching and training people in asking better questions for many years. I've taught coaches, leaders, interviewers, headhunters, lawyers, all sorts of people in this. And in the beginning, I also went to one of these trainings called active listening and also question technique. And it's funny because as I was moving into this, I realized, ooh, I'm really good at asking the questions. However, I had a colleague who was equally good at asking questions, and for some strange reason, he got better answers. Now, I could not figure out what he was doing. I simply could not figure out what he was doing. But we started doing a lot of assignments together, and gradually, I started unconsciously to start getting better answers. So my questions were still good, comparatively, lots of open-ended questions and all these things that belongs, but I started getting the better answers. Now, initially, I have to admit, I really didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that I got better answers until I came across that you could actually write down mental strategies. And that's when I started saying, okay, what is the difference? And based on that, I developed a concept called generative questioning. There are two parts of generative questioning. And today we're going to be dealing with part number one, which is really about how we listen. Because if we don't listen well enough to the answers, we will not have the opportunity to ask the better follow-up questions. And this is basically what the seminar is about today. So I'm just going to switch into the PowerPoint presentation. Again, today is more technique-oriented, just like, oops, let's see here. And just be patient with me for a second. And here we go. So hopefully you now see also my slideshow. So what it really is about is once we start listening to what people are saying, then we definitely have a better chance of picking up and by that asking the good follow-up question. And this is what we're going to do. Now, there are a couple of things that leads us into trouble. One of them is that we do have pitfalls in the brain. Number one is assumptions. I actually dedicated a whole webinar to how come we make these assumptions. How come the brain does that? What's the process in it? So that's going to be next week. But assumptions is definitely something where we assume that this will happen based on either something we see or hear or something that we have already imagined in our brain. In other words, we do have an expectation. Now, one of my mentors has always said that disappointment requires adequate planning. And part of that is because we assume somebody or something will happen. Somebody will do something or something will happen. So again, this is how our brain functions, but again, we've reserved a whole seminar for that. Then we also have rule of thumb. So we say, okay, when this happens, it always goes like this. It has to be because that's just the way it is, and everybody knows that. You even have also an expression said common sense. However, the only thing I know about common sense is that there's nothing common about it. But here is the little secret. In the wonderful active listening concept, which I believe is probably the most trained concept for listening all over the world, it is a great concept. I have to admit, there's tons of good stuff. But, and here comes the but, there is a little thing inside that makes it not possible. And one part of that is that you have to occupy the brain, spending mental energy on saying, how will I rephrase this? How will I paraphrase this? And the moment you go on the inside and you do that, then you're in trouble. Because what they didn't take into consideration is that hearing is not a simultaneous process. It is a sequential process. So you can either listen to yourself or to the person you are talking to. Now, can I prove this? Yes, I can. Because you can actually direct your hearing so much that if you're in a big room with lots of people talking, like a cocktail party, something like that, and then you then start pointing your attention in one direction, you can actually listen to people far away, although there is all the noise, simply because we can direct in our hearing in one word and take away everything else. So it is a sequential process, and you have to make up your mind. Who do you want to listen to? Your own wonderful thoughts and voice, or the other person? Now, I do believe that if we're sitting having a normal conversation about the football game, it doesn't matter so much. But when we are in a professional setting, and particularly like leadership, and we ask somebody a question, I actually find it kind of rude not to listen to the answer. So this is one of the things that where we really get it wrong, and that's one of the reasons why this wonderful concept of active listening just cannot function as good as intended. Now, there are two things you can do to steer around it, and this is again what we're going to be talking about today. So number one is what I call focused listening. So instead of attempting the impossible, simply just focus on what is being said. In other words, shut up on the inside. Shut down your internal voice and listen. Just listen to the words coming out of the other person's mouth. Not just a part of it, but all of it. And yes, sometimes that does require patience. I know that. I tried it myself a couple of times where people went on and on and on, and I really had a hard time staying focused. But practice makes champions. Now, another thing that you can do is also that whatever people say, you can always take for granted. And we can always just accept also what other people say to us as a leader say to us, or we can start asking questions, what I call critical thinking, where we actually go in and start asking questions about the assumptions of the other person. Now, there's a whole field of linguistics in the world of neurolinguistic programming where you actually can go in and start recognizing language structures, but we're not going to go there today. I'm just saying that part of what makes you successful is having some curiosity in there. We talked about the motives on Monday, and of course, some people are more curious than others. But if it's your job, then make it your job, no matter what your motive is. Now, let's have a look at what normally happens. So in a traditional listening process, and this I've been testing in trainings all over the world for the last 20 years. So there may be exceptions. I may now offend some of you by saying that 99% will do this following process. But bear with me, I don't have you in the room, but then otherwise I would be able to test where you are. But traditionally, people think, okay, I gotta ask a question, then they ask the question, and then they get an answer. Nothing wrong in that. However, here is the pitfall. And again, this is a natural process, and the more impatient you are, the more this will happen. So when we then start hearing the answer, at some point, and I don't know where it is for you, but I know at some point, you gotta start thinking about your next question. That means it's gonna look like this. So in reality, you're cutting away half of the other person's answer, maybe sometimes even more. Again, this is related to patience, and when we are testing it in classrooms, we can see that majority has fallen off the listening wagon after around 40%, maybe 50 sometimes, but no more on average. Of course, there are a few who's a little bit better and more patient, but generally speaking, that's where most people fall off. That also means that you have unconsciously decided that the other half of the answer isn't interesting. But here's my question. How do you know that the most interesting part is in the first half and not in the second half? Well, we don't. And this is the challenge. So one of the things that will happen is when you do this, your next question, in this case, question number 2, is not really connected to question number 1 because you already answered the question, asked the question, and you got some kind of answer, so you've done your job. And this is again how the brain goes. I'm sure this is not what you're sitting thinking when you're doing it, but technically the brain goes, okay, I did cover the base, now on to the next base. So at the end of the day, you're going to be jumping around. And what this little thing illustrates here is if you look at the core, that's kind of the real story. Then you have what could be picked up. That's kind of the dotted yellow line. And then you start asking questions, jumping around the core from different perspectives, just asking questions. and not really following up on them. And at the end of the day, your brain will make an assumption based on very little information, and you will be even further away from the core. Sometimes so far away that your conclusion has nothing to do with reality and is more fiction than any science fiction movie you can possibly watch. So this is the trick. This is the secret. This is where it goes wrong. So let's look at instead what to do instead. And this is the magic. Now, again, this will require some patience. And when you start practicing this at home, bear with yourself. Don't kill yourself if you get a little bit impatient. The most important thing is you start picking up that, ooh, I did it again. And then you just get back on the horse and start over and with more patience. So let's look at the process. So basically, the thing here is that I recommend, and again, this is for professional use. You can, of course, use it privately, but it really matters that you get the right answers and you get into the real core of a story. So first, we got to reflect. Where do we want to go with this question? What do we want to examine? What kind of open question would we like to open out with? And then we ask the question. Now, eventually, you're going to get the answer. And here is the magic. And here is what requires practice. Because as you can see, now we insert an L, and an L is for listening. So you're going to be listening all the way to the answer is over. Once you have that full answer, then you're going to be reflecting again. What was there? What was not there? What would I need to ask more about in the answer that was there? Meaning we're going to circle back to the answer we just get to either get what was there and have elaboration, or what was not there and fill in more of the blanks. Now again, you're going to get a new answer, and magic is going to appear when you then repeat this process and once more ask into this answer that you got. So it's a very, very simple process, but it does require that you are really good at also keep using open questions until you need to conclude, and then you can use a closed question. But if you want information, you don't want to feed people, spoon feed people, then you got to use a lot of the open questions. Roughly, I would say in a good question scenario, you're going to be using around 80 to 90% open questions and only 10, 15, 20% closed questions. That's going to make you champion. Now, again, the arrow, what we're questioning in the answer, I've illustrated like this. So the reflection process that we have is what was in the answer that was really interesting but not really full, or what was not there that I need to have filled in. Instead of jumping to a new topic, you go back. And you keep doing that until you get that wonderful feeling of, whoa, now I'm there. Because that is a feeling. It's hard to explain, it's hard to describe, but that's what it really is. So this is really what will take you there. Now, if you start doing this and you start chaining these questions, then by open questions, you're going to see magic. Now, I'm going to share a story with you that proved this point. I was dealing with somebody who was sent to me from an insurance company as a long-term unemployed, and they really wanted to get him back in job because he was having a salary insurance. And for some reason, when we sat down, I accidentally looked at the watch right on the wall behind him, and I noticed that it was 10 sharp. And my opening question to him was, what can I do for you today? Now, he kept talking and talking and talking, and he kept talking and talking and talking. And after a while, I realized that his problem was that he did get to the interviews, but he was talking way too much and not answering the questions, because he also wasn't listening to the question of the interviewer. He was listening to himself and what he assumed was important to the interviewer, which is really not answering the question you're getting. Now, I started saying, okay, let me see how patient I can be. And this was really a test. And I just kept listening and listening. And I have to admit that after about half an hour, my brain started drifting. I simply couldn't focus anymore. But after having planned the dinner and the weekend activities in my brain for the following half hour, he stopped after 60 minutes and 30 seconds. That was his one answer on one question. And I looked at him and I said, now that's all interesting, but if you don't mind, would you answer my question? Because he still hadn't answered the question. And this is where it becomes interesting again, because one thing is that you have to listen to their answers, but you also have to be aware that the people you're talking to also will have these assumptions running, and they're going to start assuming what you want to hear or what they think they should say to please you. And this is again a challenge, because the moment they do that, they're going to answer something different. And here's what I have observed in my trainings. A lot of people will ask great questions, and then the person they're asking the question will start answering something which is definitely not what was asked. And the interviewer will accept it. Now, I don't get that, because if I'm asking you whether you want a coffee or not, and you start telling me about your stomach issues and your morning run, I'm sorry, it might be interesting if I was asking about your health issues or your exercise regime. However, I'd only asked you if you wanted a cup of coffee. And this is where we, with a smile on our face and a friendly tone of voice, have to then start educating people. Please, I actually asked you something different. Now, I'm just taking a simple example. So it does require that you listen to what is in there, and then you also reflect, did I actually get the answer I was asking for, or did they answer something completely different? And again, when they do, it is not ill intention. It is simply assumption about what they think you want to hear. And sometimes they then start asking themselves other questions than the one you're actually asking. So it goes two ways. You have to educate yourself in listening to the people you're asking questions. And then after that, then you have to also, in a gentle way, at least in the beginning, you have to educate them in listening to what you're asking them. And the more you do this, you're going to start generating this wonderful dialogue where it comes deeper and deeper, and you get more and more quality information. Very often you're going to find information where the person you are interviewing or talking to or asking questions is going to end up looking at you with surprise and go, whoa, that was really interesting. I never thought about that, or I couldn't remember, or whatever. And this is the thing, because we do all remember. It's just that sometimes we forgot how to find it, because our brain is like the biggest hard disk you can ever imagine. So things will disappear. And that's why if we're not curious, if you just take the surface value, we're not going to get very deep. So trying to illustrate this again, if you remember the drawing from before, here in this case, you have used a starting question, and then you start circling with this method, and you do it by predominantly open questions. We could go a lot into all the more refinement of questions, but I do assume that most of you know what an open question is, and also a closed question. If not, I really recommend you Google that, but open question is something like what, where, how, when, who, etc. So think about that when you start chaining these, you start getting more and more things to fill in, and eventually you're going to have everything filled in. And once you have one circle completed, then you can jump to another area, attacking the issue from a different perspective, and start doing the same thing. Now, I do realize that when I illustrate this, and this is also what I see, people look at me in trainings and go, whew, this is way too demanding, way too requiring. It's going to take forever. Yes, in the beginning, it's going to take a little longer. And the weirdest thing you will find is when you are doing the reflection, that actually institutes a break, a little pause. And a lot of people are really afraid of silence. They're afraid of the pause. They're afraid of looking like they're reflecting, because isn't silence embarrassing? And again, the more extroverted you are, the higher you are on social participation, the more difficult it's going to be in the beginning. But it is okay. And typically the break that feels so long for you, the pause, is in reality quite short. So it doesn't really hurt anything. So basically just reflect and think about, okay, what was there, what was not there, what kind of open question should I ask to get there? And in the beginning, when you do this process consciously, yes, it's going to take a little bit more time. I do appreciate that. It's going to do that. But if you practice this for 2 weeks, something like 2 weeks, just a little bit every day, you'll realize how quickly it comes to you and how much faster you get to the information you really need. And this is the beauty. This is where there's a huge reward for this. And that's why it really pays off. It has a very quick return on investment because you don't have to invest much time in it. Just a little bit of effort, then a little bit of honesty towards yourself about when you did become too impatient, when you didn't listen to the whole answer, and then next time you just put even more effort into listening. And again, in the beginning, I wouldn't recommend you practicing in a really important meeting or conversation because you may be so focused on the conscious process here that you do not necessarily pick up all the content. But after a while, it's going to be an unconscious process. And like I said, what I have seen when I train people, and some of the longest training I do is 9 days, and when people come out of that, they're actually able to do this. So when I'm saying 2 weeks, it's because I don't assume you're going to be in a full-time training, but I do assume that if you put an effort into it and you want to learn this, you can do it by just practicing with 1 or 2 people every day for 2 weeks, and you will notice then it's there. If it still feels difficult, and again, sometimes it does, go back, ask yourself, okay, how much am I using the open questions? Am I using too many closed questions? Because you will not get that much information. They're easier to ask, but you will have to search and find. Now, if I say to you, I was on a holiday last summer, and you start guessing where I went instead of asking me, where did you go to? Right? One question, and I will answer that. But if I start guessing, you start guessing, you go, oh, you went to Mallorca, you went to Morocco, you went to France, you went to the UK, you went to the US, you went to Bali. There's a lot of countries, and not only countries, but also locations in the world. So it's a lot easier just asking. Now let's put that into the same model here. So presupposing that I want to know if you had a vacation last summer and where it was and what was all about it. So I'm going to ask then. So first of all, I could open here just with a closed question, not to waste my time. So did you actually go on a vacation last summer? Because asking about where if I didn't go is also a waste. So in this particular case, I'm going to open up with that. And I'm going to say, yes, I did. And then my follow-up question will be, where did you go to? Okay. Now, I'm going to say France. And then we all know that France is a big country. And then I'm going to say, so where in France did you go to? Again, going for the elaboration. Okay. And then I can go from there. And how did you go there? So again, asking for the mean of transportation. And I could go, who were you with? And how long were you away? And what did you do while you were there? And then you get typically one answer. And then again, and what else did you do? And then I can go back to, what did you enjoy the most? What did you enjoy the least? And so on and so forth. And eventually, I'm going to have you telling everything there is to know about this holiday in France. However, if I started out with guessing where you went to, I would still be guessing countries by the time we were all leaving. So it's really a bad plan. So this is really the secret to it, is first of all, think about what direction do you have on your question. Always have an intention. Pay attention to when you are listening to the outside and when you start listening too much to yourself, when you start cheating and jumping and thinking about the next question. And then remember that the next follow-up question should be to the content of the answer you just got instead of jumping ahead. And you should keep doing that until you really feel you have the full information available. So secret is, when you're reflecting in the answer, what was there, that's a plus. What was not there, what was there can be elaborated, what was not there can be filled in. So this is really the focused listening part, and combining that with the questions and the understanding of language, you will have the full concept of generative listening, but that takes quite a lot more time. So just pick one of the really, really important things. And trust me, once you start getting the hang of this, you're going to see miracles in your conversation. So once more, a little introduction. Again, today more on the technique side. We also then going to take that further in, because tomorrow we're going to start talking about how to communicate change. I like to do a little advertising for that seminar because we know that most mergers and acquisitions, something like 70% are not successful. Part of the reason isn't the strategy or the idea behind the merger and acquisition, but more because that the communication that happens to the organizations are not really targeting the audience. It's coming from the sender, but not to the receiver. So we're going to be talking about that, and not only mergers and acquisitions, it can also be smaller change. It can actually be even in your family when you have to change something there. So basically, we're going to look at some ideas for how you can build up your motivation speech for the change. And then that's going to take us into next week and a lot more things, but we're going to talk more about that. Except I just want to do a little marketing also for next Friday. You can see the Caught by Assumptions. So there we're going to go in more and look at how the brain actually does this, because that's going to give you even more ideas on how to ask better questions once you understand the process of thinking and reflection. So again here, I'm going to now stop the recording. And we are